It is now my pleasure to introduce one of the 2022 Alumni Achievement Award winners and your Class Day keynote speaker, Robert Ryan, retired Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Medtronic, Inc. Mr. Ryan was born and raised in Detroit, and after being advised by his father to choose a profession where discrimination would least impede his advancement, he became the first in his family to attend college, graduating from Wayne State University with a degree in electrical engineering in 1965, before pursuing a National Fellowship doctoral program at Cornell. Now, Mr. Ryan describes realizing that engineering wasn't really what he wanted to do, so he left in 1968 with a master's in electrical engineering to start at Harvard Business School. At the time, the student body then was only about 2% African American. Mr. Ryan graduated from HBS in 1970 and spent his early career, as many of us will, with McKinsey and Citicorp. In 1982, Mr. Ryan was recruited to join Union Texas Petroleum, then part of Allied Signal, eventually taking on the role of CFO to lead Union Texas through an LBO that created one of the nation's largest independent oil and gas companies. After the 1987 stock market crash, Mr. Ryan structured a deal that kept Union Texas alive and independent before moving his family to Minneapolis to join Medtronic as Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, Medtronic being the world leader in medical technology, whose global operations and 90,000 employees generate more than $30 billion in annual revenues. Those who know Mr. Ryan not only laud his career, but his philanthropy. Though neither of his parents attended college, both emphasized the importance of education, a trait that Mr. Ryan honors through the Robert L. Ryan Fellowship at HBS, which has supported 22 students since 2004, and the Ryan Scholars Program, established at Cornell in 2013, which has supported more than 300 students of color during their undergraduate engineering careers. More recently, Mr. Ryan consulted on revitalizing the oldest Black-owned business in Minneapolis, the Estes Funeral Chapel, which, along with being a cornerstone of the community, is now one of the premier funeral facilities in the area and home to the professionals who cared for George Floyd, who was murdered on this day 2 years ago in 2020. Brandon and I have so enjoyed getting to know Bob in the weeks preceding today's ceremony, as our discussions have moved between the HBS Today, where Mr. Ryan insists that the students are more focused and confident than he ever was. Focused? Not sure. Confident? For sure. To advising us both on the correct answer to the question, how long have you been married? Not long enough. And we're so excited to extend the privilege of getting to know Mr. Ryan to you all here today. Please welcome our distinguished Class Day speaker, Mr. Robert Ryan.
Good afternoon, Dean Datar, the Harvard Business School faculty and administration, my fellow award recipients, families, and invited guests. My comments today are directed at you, and you is the Harvard Business School class of 2022. I want to congratulate you and your families for all that you have achieved to get to this point in your life, and I want to look forward. I congratulate you in advance for doing great things that HBS has prepared me for, leading change in a way that will lead to a better and more equitable world. Let me start by saying that forming and delivering this message to the HBS class of 2022 has been one of the most difficult things that I've done over the past few years. I have over many, many years given hundreds of presentations on financial matters all over the world and to all kinds of audiences. And I could prepare these in pretty short order, almost with my eyes closed. For this speech, however, I thought long and hard about how, in the twilight of my career, I could help bring perspective to you at the beginning of yours. In doing so, I began to think decades back, in fact 5 decades back, into my HBS experience and when I was in your position. One of the few advantages of age is the experience gained. And with a few years under my belt, in fact more than a few, I'd like to try to reconnect with the Bob Ryan that came here in 1970. I actually came in 1968, 54 years ago. And we stand here with a much different 2022. HBS's focus on leadership, as you've all heard, is not new. It was strong 54 years ago when I entered the MBA program, and it's strong today. It's produced an incredible number of strong leaders in virtually every area imaginable. Looking back more than 50 years, it's clear that HBS played a tremendously important role in shaping the Bob Ryan who arrived here in Boston 54 years ago. First, let me share with you my path to HBS. I decided before high school that I'd be an engineer. Not that I wanted to be an engineer, but the pay was good, had job security, and I thought it was a world of less than average racism. I had long dreamed of a career in business, but I didn't really see it as a viable choice. However, as I was completing my master's degree thesis at Cornell, I was awarded a NASA fellowship to study for a PhD. This forced me to make a decision that I had delayed many times, to make a choice between several years of study for a career that I didn't really want versus taking a once-in-a-lifetime chance and taking a risk and go for the career that I did want. I applied to only one school, HBS, and I did that because I believed I needed a degree from what I believed was the best. I didn't know what opportunities I'd have in life without the best. And I have to tell you, I did not have a fallback if I didn't get in. I was really not quite so sure where I'd go next. I entered HBS highly nervous about a number of things. Whether I'd be accepted in class, I was uncertain, worried about career prospects, would I get a job when I got out, and would I look back on my life in the past and say, boy, I failed, I went after a dream that was a failed dream, but I gave up something that was, I thought, a sure thing. As every HBS person has experienced, the teaching of leadership here begins with the first day of class. One student will be called upon to provide his or her analysis of today's case, and the analysis is, what are the key issues? What's your action plan? What expected outcome do you anticipate? This is followed by having to defend that analysis to 74 other people. This is exactly the opposite of the engineering problem-solving process that I'd learned and used proficiently for a number of years. Initially, I got into case detail to such an extent that I had great difficulty getting to the broader, more strategic issues in the case. Also, I never had to verbally defend my work. That was totally new. This meant that my success in the MBA program was contingent on my learning a new and different way of thinking and expressing myself. I think of these two lessons as what I call or think of as Leadership 101. It was the start of my learnings at HBS, and I did, after many cold calls, learn to make these changes, and have benefited from them for more than 50 years. Another issue of concern to me 54 years ago, and it's still of concern today, and it really shouldn't be, is the issue of race. In 1968, the first year class, I actually did a little research, it was actually a little over 3%. And the previous year, it was well below that. But again, roughly 3% African Americans. And it was clear that some students in the class didn't think we ought to be here. I don't know how many, but there were some who felt we didn't deserve to be at HBS. Coming from Detroit, this was the first time where I was in such a small minority and had to work closely with majority students, some of whom, without even knowing me, some of whom had not met me, felt that I shouldn't be here. It was at this time that I developed my personal approach to dealing with the issue of race and inequality, and it's one that's with me here today, even 50 years later. Several of the early HBS cases dealing with business issues spell out the benefit of understanding what is controllable versus what is not controllable. This is a lesson that I've applied to my life. And this led me to choose to ignore those who felt that I shouldn't be here, To do otherwise would amount to giving control of my life to someone or something that I couldn't control. But even more important than that decision, it forced me to double down on working with and developing meaningful relationships with the incredible and diverse talent here at the school. Because about 97% of the class was not African American, I soon realized that I had to form meaningful relationships and work well with every single person in the class without regard to any aspect of his or her background or beliefs. This incredible long-term accomplishments of the HBS class and the class of 1970 more than validated my taking this approach. If we move a few weeks into the first year, each section votes to elect 2 students to the Student Association, which I see is still alive and well here today. I was very surprised when several section mates nominated me for that position, and I was really surprised when I was elected. And this was the first positive and affirming thing that really affirmed my decision to develop relationships with others in the program, relationships both business and personal that remain with me even today. In many ways, I envy the position of you new graduates today. You've accomplished a goal that will open doors and create opportunities that in this moment you cannot see. Even 5 years from now, you won't see. It'll evolve over your whole career. You will do this with new friends that will last a lifetime. For me, the journey from the classroom to the boardroom was one of uncertainty, growth, and ultimately awakening. But please indulge me. I'm going to look back a few minutes. The Bob Ryan of 54 years ago, except for a short trip across the border from Detroit into Canada, had never traveled outside of the U.S. or met anyone born outside of this country. I never envisioned multiple supersonic flights all over the world to arrange multi-billion-dollar financings. I never envisioned having done this so many times that when I retired as CFO at Medtronic, the New York Stock Exchange asked if I and my family would ring the closing bell on the stock exchange that day. I never envisioned starting HBS with a roommate from Paris, France. And I would soon learn how little I knew about much of the world and how much I still needed to learn. I never envisioned forming close personal relationships with people who were so unlike me or had backgrounds so different from mine. Yet one of my dearest friends is an HBS classmate where I was honored to be best man at his wedding. This friendship has been a fantastic one for 54 years for both me and my family, and my good friend Ed Schneider is here in the audience today. These are but a few of the examples meant to provide an idea of the ways that my 2 years at HBS changed my life in every way imaginable and caused me to grow in both a business and a personal sense, sometimes simultaneously, as I'll share. In summary, my 2 years at HBS were critical to my development in 3 important ways. 1, I learned to think more broadly than I had as an engineer and look at the work and its impact in the strategic sense. 2nd, I found my own personal approach for dealing with and progressing beyond racism and those small enough to be constrained by it. And 3rd, it's the place where I learned to work with, develop business and personal relationships with everyone. I'll spare you all of a lot of details, and my family knows I'm happy to talk about these things, but I've had 40 years of high-level CFO experience, years of experience serving on the board of directors of 5 Fortune 500 companies, as well as serving as a trustee at Cornell University. Much of my professional experience and corporate career have provided perspective on how the decisions we make and our approach to our work can create extraordinary ripples of change in the communities in which we live. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about something a little more current. In 2016, I was 73 years old. I had been retired from Medtronic for 11 years, was winding down my board service, and looking forward to true retirement, which I have not yet gotten to. It was at this point that I was asked to find a way to keep the Estes Funeral Chapel from being shut down. Estes Funeral Chapel is the only African-American funeral home in Minneapolis and the oldest black business in the city. That being said, the business was in terrible shape, and Hennepin County was on the verge of shutting it down. Estes founder Richard Estes had passed away and left behind a business that served the entire African American community, from the poorest to the wealthiest alike. Richard and the business he left was much beloved by the community and a genuine example of the enduring value of small local business. Julia Hanna, who is on the HBS staff here, Julia interviewed me, she interviewed Richard's widow, April Estes, and others, and prepared, I think, an incredibly well-done podcast that has been sent to each of the graduates in each of the graduating class. And I'd urge you to listen to it. It will provide perspective on the comments, and it'll shorten really what I have to take you through today, but I think the podcast is incredibly well done. What I'll do is I'll just simply provide you a Cliff Notes version. And the points that I'll summarize below in many ways remind me when I talked about Leadership 101, but it also reminds me of many HBS cases that I've been through. And in real shortened words, I'll take you quickly through what we did with the funeral chapel, and then I'll talk about the outcome. The first thing I did is what you do in many HBS cases. I gained an understanding of the funeral market environment for Minneapolis. And I could really describe it in 4 or 5 segments. The second thing I did was and not just me, it was a team. I pulled many others in to help me. We drilled down into the African American segment to understand what it provided to the community, what would happen if it were shut down, and made this case. Following this, I worked with Hennepin County executives, and this took months to get done, but essentially laid out for them the implication not just for the city, but the implications for them personally. If you let something like this, a tremendous need of the community, go away, people might love it today, but might not feel so good about it a year or 2 from now. After many months of working this through, we ended up with a reasonably complicated 2-step process, but the county invested $6 million to build a new funeral chapel. Beyond this, again, more Leadership 101, HBS case. We had to find a builder who built funeral homes, and we started off with a vision that we wanted a funeral home that was world-class in every way, that could attract anyone, not just African American. But we found a builder who built only funeral homes. We found an architect, which is a labor of love. And then, being an old engineer, I said, let's think about technology. For a truly advanced firm, you've got to have technology. So we engaged a firm called Technology by Design. I won't take you through what we ended up with, but we ended up with a wonderful funeral chapel, state-of-the-art, tremendous technology, the ability to webcast funerals, as good or better than anything in the entire city. It opened on October 1st, 2018, and that got followed by a dramatic increase in business, which opened another whole set of issues. We had to strengthen staffing, which meant we had to bring in new and other employees. We had to then bring in accounting. We had to strengthen accounting, procedures, control. In June 9, 2020, roughly 18, 19 months after the opening, George Floyd funeral was held by Estes. And we've had, unfortunately, 2 or 3 other high-profile funerals that have been held. And now I'm currently still working at this 6 years later, trying to work through a transition from the owner to a new set of people, to the 2 people who run it, hoping that they can buy it from her and keep the ownership local. I will tell you that working with Estes is different than anything I've ever done in my career. And not only because of the type of business, but because it's what I would call a hyper-local focus. It's focused locally in the community and loved by the community. This was an effort for which I would not have ever accepted a penny for. This was a complete volunteer job, and I'm still doing it and loving it. There are a couple of things I'd like to mention. One, first, I want to point out the service that Estes provides allows the most economically disadvantaged in the community to bury loved ones with dignity and respect. Many African Americans have had difficult lives, my parents included in that, to provide a better life for their children who follow, and others in the family. Families of the deceased do everything that they can to provide a good life, and the families, in turn, the families of the deceased, do everything they can to provide a good send-off to acknowledge these efforts after death. The work at Estes was very emotional for me because I felt this way when I arranged funerals for my parents at a funeral home in Detroit. and one that I wished would have had a facility and the thoughtfulness and the same care of exceptional care that these families had. The true send-off that I provided for my families is the HBS Fellowship in their honor, the most fitting way I could think of to memorialize their sacrifice for me. When I receive letters and videos from the recipients of the fellowship, I think of them, I think of my parents, and the foundation that HBS provided and sent me off with. Second, the African American community was and is so appreciative of the new chapel. On the day that George Floyd was murdered, this is a day we'll never forget, a national moment that none of us could have predicted. There was, as we have all seen, major civil unrest in Minneapolis. From our apartment terrace in downtown Minneapolis, my wife Sharon and I could see smoke rising from discord and protest in various parts of the city. We could hear gunfire, police sirens, and sounds in the city in turmoil, and the anger and despair, and while that's not new in the country, Minneapolis wouldn't traditionally be the first place many of us thought we'd see a national reckoning on race and injustice that continues even to today. Interesting to note that during this time, the Estes Funeral Chapel was not touched. For 3 consecutive nights, local church members, members of a North Minneapolis motorcycle club, and community residents sat in the Estes parking lot from evening until the following morning to ensure that nothing and no one was harmed. This is a truly beautiful sentiment amidst tragic and frightening conditions. Also, I'll point out the new business is blossoming. Most of the more affluent, profitable American business has returned to the funeral chapel. They're also working on ways to best market to segments outside of the African American community. And amazingly, we're seeing a growth from diverse segments of the community, largely because of the new building and the webcasting and the technical abilities that it has. When I began working with Estes, the business was in such shape that the staff was not paid, I'd guess, a third of the time. Today, the staff is fully paid 100% of the time. They're now considering 401k plans. They're thinking about their future. And this is a development that I particularly love to see. And I'd like to just make a few closing comments to the class. First, I want to thank all of you for giving me this reason to revisit my own career through a lens I hadn't really considered before. Your HBS education and the relationships forged here will serve you incredibly well. Schools are meant to teach and prepare, while life provides you with the valuable experience to unlock the truest value from your education. The result is your unique and timely contribution to a better world. As I already described, my career has been filled with a range of experiences, many of which I'm very proud and grateful for. But in retrospect, each one gives me perspective, and that perspective allowed me to create impact. Whether working on a tragic oil rig disaster at Union, Texas, or improving millions of lives at Medtronic, or especially the work at the Estes Funeral Chapel, each gave me a perspective that I didn't previously have. I was reflecting on a major financing that I worked on at Medtronic. It was a $2 billion, very successful convertible bond transaction supporting Medtronic's entry into the diabetes business. While the work at Estes doesn't compare in pure dollar terms, when I see the impact in the community and the impact on human lives, it ranks as high as anything I've ever done. I wish I'd had this experience insight much sooner, so I'm sharing it with you at the beginning of your career. This leads me to say that I'd like to see the class of 2022 keep 3 thoughts in mind as you take the next step on your journey. First, understand how incredibly fortunate you are to leave HBS with the unique skills, relationships, and advantages that few possess. The polarization of views that are seen almost everywhere today place a premium on leadership, which I believe to be the best, perhaps the only way, to peacefully bring widely opposing views into alignment. Second, the skills that you leave HBS with work everywhere, not just in the corporate and for-profit world, and I urge you to share that gift wherever you find yourself. And third, look beyond simply the dollars involved and consider actions that improve human lives, often difficult, if not difficult to quantify. The value can be immeasurable. I urge you to think about these points sooner rather than later, as they will be what you lean on as you make your decisions to do more than affect your future. They may very well change the lives of many. I once met Billie Jean King, a visionary leader and champion tennis player who spearheaded the drive for equality of women in sports, and also for members of the LGBTQ community who said, "Pressure is a privilege. Leading change is often accompanied by pressure. The privilege of HBS is the opportunity to take all that this institution is and has been into an exciting and unknown future. Embrace that and embrace your journey, but do it with principle and purpose that come from what you've learned here, the people you've met, and the family and friends that support you. I'd like to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the opportunity to address you and tell you, go forth." I've got one more comment. I'm not sure everyone's going to embrace this one, but my daughter, my son-in-law, and my granddaughter live here in Boston, and my son-in-law asked me to end this by saying, "Celtics in 7."